and then we'll see where we can cover up for the participant who is not with us. Let's begin with a word of prayer, and we'll pray from a collect from the Book of Common Prayer, page 111. And as I say the opening prayer, as a group, it's also good for us to pray for Dave, since he's one of us. And so you can continue saying a silent prayer for Dave, even as I say the prayer. Let us pray. Eternal God, who led your ancient people into freedom by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, grant that we who walk in the light of your presence may rejoice in the liberty of the children of God. At this time, as we begin this class this afternoon, we want to remember in a special way our brother Dave as he prepares for his procedure, maybe later this week. Lord, we pray that your grace may be so much sufficient to him. Be with him and guide him through Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
I think since we had our story last week, just for us to be able to connect with this week's story, which is in chapter 6, we are going to request Mr. Trent in maybe 5 minutes or so to give, or rather to retell our story for next week, so that we can now come to this week's story.
Well, last week we, Joseph has brought his clan into Egypt. And so, all was pretty good when he first got everything there set up. But now there's kind of, they kind of had sold all of themselves into slavery, because after the famine, and now we have a new Pharaoh that's not so nice, and he's oppressing the Israelites. They're becoming more, they're outnumbering the native Egyptians. They're getting a little bit nervous about that. So the Pharaoh decides that maybe a little euthanasia might work. So he wants all the male children killed, and so the midwives, say, hey, those they beat me to it. Like, they already had their babies before I got there, so we couldn't kill the babies, and so that didn't work. And so he decides to have all of the male children under, I guess, 3 killed. And so Moses, he's a baby, and his mother tries to, hide him as long as she can. And so she realizes this not going to work out so well. So she puts him in the river, makes a little basket, and puts some pitch and so forth in that. And Pharaoh's sister comes to the water, and meanwhile, Moses' oldest sister, Miriam, is kind of watching the babies. He's going to be okay. And Pharaoh's sister sees the baby, says, "Oh, baby," and so forth. And then she says she thinks it's just a coincidence that Miriam is there. And she says, "Hey, do you know any Egyptian women that can kind of nurse this child for a little bit? I'd like to, she's going to adopt him." And so, Mary says, yeah, I know somebody. So so until, in his first informative years, maybe Moses is raised as an Israelite. But then he's raised then after he's weaned or whatever as an Egyptian. And then he kind of wakes up to, see the oppression that's going on. And so he goes and walks around and sees, a taskmaster abusing an Egyptian, and he kills the taskmaster. And then next day he sees a couple of Egyptians, and he said, "Hey, let's just all get along. Let's stop fighting." And they're like, "Hey, are you going to kill us too? Who put you in charge?" kind of thing. So then he realized, oh shoot, maybe somebody, even though he buried the Egyptian that he killed in the sand, maybe somebody saw it. So he flees to where was that? What's the area that he Midian? No, yeah, Midian. And so he goes and he meets his wife, and he gets married there and so forth, and he's raising sheep and everything looks pretty good. His father-in-law is a priestly guy and so forth, and then he gets this vision. He goes up on the mountain, this flaming bush, and it's God, talking to him. And he says, I see my people crying out to me, the oppression that is happening by the Egyptians, and I want you to, lead them out of Egypt. And so he says, hey, I can't even talk real good, whatever. I'm not the man. And he goes, nah, yeah, you're all right. So he gets his brother to help him, to be his spokesperson. So he goes to Egypt, and it's kind of interesting that he comes in to Egypt on a donkey with his wife and his children and their son, and so they go to Pharaoh, and and before he ever comes there, God tells him that Pharaoh's not going to just let this happen. He's going to have, and I'm going to harden his heart, and he's not going to let you go so much. And so he goes to Pharaoh, and the first thing he says, hey, we just want to go out and have a little feast for about 3 days and worship our God. So if you could just let us go, we want to do this. And so Pharaoh, says, nah, I'm not gonna let you do that. So he starts, there's 10 plagues. Starts out with, there's blood in the water, and so Pharaoh looks like, okay, fine, I'll let you go. And then changes his mind, hardens, and he's not going to let them go out and worship their God. And so then we have the plague of the frogs and the lice and the flies, and the livestock are all killed. There's boils and hail, locusts, and there's 3 days of darkness. And each time Pharaoh goes, yeah, I'll let you go. No, change my mind. Not going to do it. And so then they have the Passover, where the angel of death is going to come. And so Moses says, hey, we're going to put the lamb of the blood of the lamb on our lintel and on our doorpost. And we're going to be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. We're going to have unleavened bread, so we can just leave right away. And this is going to be, we'll all remember this for forever. This is big sort of a ceremony. Well, sure enough, angel of death comes, firstborn of everyone who wasn't protected with the blood of the lamb, they die. And so meanwhile, they guess that, Pharaoh's had enough. He just wants the Egyptians out of there. So he says, all right, you can just go, just get out. So it's no longer just going out for 3 days worth of religious ceremony. They're kicked out of Egypt. And then which kind of leads us up to where we are today.
Thank you so much, Trent, for a very good overview of last week's story. Where we are today, as we begin chapter 6, Hemi was supposed to give us a foundation, or rather bring us up to speed in terms of what was happening on the ground. Do we have Hemi on board?
I don't believe Jaime is with us.
All right. So did he delegate to anybody maybe on the crew?
What I do kind of, I'm supposed to put about highlights and lowlights,
Yeah.
and it kind of takes in everything that's been happening. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether that would substitute or not.
Okay, that's your part, Sue. But maybe before we come there, maybe we need to bring ourselves up to speed in terms of the beginning of the story, in terms of what was happening as chapter 6 begins. I think basically, if I could say maybe in a few words, trend stopped where the Israelites have departed. But then, even after the departure, Pharaoh did not, or rather, after some time, he was like, what did I do? Why did I let these people just leave? And so maybe his advisors came to him, or maybe his own decision, and he mobilized the defense forces to go after the children of Israel. And where the story begins is now where the children of Israel have gone all the way to the Red Sea, trying to think or trying to figure out how do we cross over. And they camped at the banks, maybe trying to figure out what are we going to do. And it was at this juncture that now the troops of Pharaoh appears, and of course, a sense of hopelessness for the Israelites. I mean, maybe by the time they were departing from Egypt, their hopes, their spirits were so high. But now it comes a time, maybe they are lowest, because they were like, we have just departed. We were just celebrating our freedom. And even before we are through with the celebration, here are the troops of Pharaoh. We are not sure whether they are going to take us back where we came from, or whether they have been ordered to come and kill all of us. I mean, a very, very hopeless situation. I think in a few words, that's where kind of the story begins. Would someone maybe want to add something before Sue picks up?
I just think that it was God's plan that for Pharaoh to come after them, because whether it was then or later on, it was going to happen. When their whole workforce was gone, they were going to go after him. So, I mean, God had to protect his people, and the only way to really do that was to destroy Pharaoh's army and to show to the world how powerful God is.
Yep. So, according to Trent, that was God's way of showing his majesty. Because maybe if he didn't destroy Pharaoh's troops, things could have been different. Maybe they could have even come after them, even in the wilderness. Maybe. Okay, so Sue, maybe you can pick up and give us the highlights of the story for this week, and also the low points of this week's story.
Okay, I'll try. In a nutshell, the highlights are that God was really persistent, and he wanted to have the Israelites as his nation. He wanted to be their God. And so he uses Moses, because Moses is listening, and he's faithful to listen to God. And so we start out when Pharaoh comes after them, then God says, that's okay. And he says, take your staff and hit the water. In the meantime, in all of this, the Israelites are grumbling. They grumble every time. So the low points are always the rebellious nature of the Israelites. But anyway, they miraculously get to go on the dry land through the Red River, the Red Sea, and then the Israelites are drowned and destroyed. And so the next thing that happens, they get to let's see, they're under his direction. They get to where I can't say it. It's Rephaim, where the water, but they don't have any water. And so the Israelites once again say, "Why did you take us out of Egypt just to come here and die?" And so then Moses listens to God, and he hits the rock, and they have water. So then the next crisis is they're wandering in the wilderness, and they're complaining that they have no food. And they said, "You've brought us out here. We should have stayed in Egypt." And so God tells Moses, provides the food. And they have, first of all, the quail comes, and then they have the manna that's by day and by night. And even in this, the Israelites are rebellious, because God directed Moses to say, "Okay, when you collect the manna for the week, do a double take on Saturday and collect for 2 days in order to have food for the Sabbath." And they even cheated on that. Many of them did. And they ended up either taking more, and then the food got rotten. So that was a downside. But they did for 40 years. They live on this manna, and they finally end up in the wilderness of sin at Meribah. No, wait, that's where they get the water. Never mind. They finally, after 40 years, they get to Mount Sinai, and God, I might be a little off on my faith figures, but anyway, finally at Mount Sinai, God gives the 10 Commandments. He's been trying all along to say, I am your God, and here's what, and he would make promises, and they would complain. And so he started giving the 10 Commandments, and then they panicked because they didn't like when the thunder and the lightning came, when God was revealing to Moses. They said, don't have God tell us, tell Moses. We don't like all of that noise or all that commotion or all that scary stuff. So Moses goes to get the 10 Commandments, and that's when the Israelites panic, and they create the calf, and then that's destroyed, and God still doesn't give up on them. Why he didn't destroy them? Because Moses was appealing to him. And so finally Moses gets not only the 10 Commandments, but he gets instructions for the priesthood. He gets a mighty detailed directions on how to build the tabernacle. And the neat thing about the tabernacle is it says so strongly that God wants to dwell with them, and so finally God spends an awful lot of time revealing to the Israelites not only the 10 Commandments, but other ways to live, and how they are to care for those in need, and how he is with them. And so then the end is coming for Moses, and God takes him up to Mount Nebo, and he shows him all the land that belongs to the Israeli nation. But he says, but you're not going to be able to go. But this is the land that will belong to your people. And then Moses dies, and he's buried, and they don't know where he was buried. But so then that's where we end. He's buried. He dies. I know that was a little bumpily, but
right. Thank you very much, Sue. Thank you for that. That was very articulate. Now, we're going to change gears. As we were parting company last week, Anne was supposed to take the next part, but she could not be with us today. And Kimi came in handy and volunteered to take that part. So welcome, Kimi, as you take us through the next question. Who are the important people in this particular story? And who are the people who can pass unnoticed?
We roughly have 8 people that we've talked about this week. We have Pharaoh, we have the Egyptians, we have Moses, of course, the Israelites, the angel of God, Miriam, Aaron, and a very brief mention of Joshua of Nun. So the most important, or maybe we can say the most mentioned, it's got to be both Moses and the angel of God. Now, we might not think of the angel of God as a person necessarily. However, the importance of this is incredible. So we can't go without mentioning the angel of God. If we talk about Moses, he was the physical leader of the Israelites. He physically led the Israelites out of Egypt. Day after day, he was their physical presence. The angel of God. The angel of God moved in front of the Israelites as their leader, and then also took place behind them to be the safety border between them and the Egyptian army. So the angel of God, of course, was with them, really all-encompassing with them during this entire time. The most overlooked, Moses' siblings, Aaron and Miriam. If we talk about Aaron, he's Moses' older brother. He was a high priest in the Israelite camp. So we can assume that he was also a spiritual leader and a trustee to Moses. However, we can't forget that Aaron did have a lapse of judgment here. You know, when he built the calf, took the gold and built the calf as an idol. However, you know, he did come around. We have to remember, yes, he had a lapse of judgment for sure, but it wasn't meant to bring down the Israelites at that point, really. And he did come back around, but I do think it's important to remember that Moses had him as a brother there. And then we have Miriam. Now, Miriam is actually the elder sister of Moses and Aaron, and she was a prophetess. So she too, again, was a spiritual leader. And when we look back at her using the tambourine and playing music and dancing, she was she was looked upon with great honor and with great prestige as a prophetess. And she led the women. We can't forget that there were a lot of women in this movement also. So I think she played an important role. So I think if we look at the most important, definitely Moses and the angel of God, and probably the most overlooked just in this particular chapter would have to be Aaron and Miriam.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kimi, for that. Where you stopped made me think. Definitely, whenever we have 40% men, you expect to get 60% women. And especially in church or God-related activities. And so, yeah, we had a mother's union leader. I never thought of that. I mean, Miriam as a reader par excellence, as maybe the one who was going on the ground, mobilizing the women for whatever was happening. I mean, that was very, very critical. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, we had Grant's question, and that one, we are going to do it, all of us. Grant's question was, which moment or quotation do you most remember from this week's story? And number 2 of it, what did you read or hear in this week's story that you don't remember hearing before, or that struck you in a new way? Maybe to open it up, I want to highlight 2 very, very critical quotations. And the first one is where Moses told the people, after they saw the troops of Pharaoh coming, where Moses told the people, "Have no fear, stand firm, and you will see how God will save you. He will do the fighting for us." That was a very, remember, there is no time before then, before the Israelites departed from Egypt. It's like there is no place where we have seen them actively in war. But remember now, the lands they are going to occupy are already occupied lands. And so, of course, you expect a lot of military excursions. These people needed, of course, to be encouraged from the beginning. And I think this quote was very timely at this point. And actually, I think it was repeated constantly in the course of their capturing the promised land. Stand firm. God is the one who is going to fight for us. And so, to me, that was a very, very important quotation at that early stage to prepare this group for what was awaiting them later on. Maybe something else I would like to point out before I open it for all of us is the fact that these people before, remember now, they had not existed as a people again. You know, they had always existed under other countries, other states. They had stayed in Egypt under the rule of Pharaoh for many, many, many years. And of course, Moses felt, maybe through God's intervention, that for us to survive as a people, we need a constitution. And therefore, the next most notable area for me is actually where we can say there was the promulgation of their constitution, the rules which will be guiding them. And actually, the 10 Commandments are still in that particular section. Another one is, "Hear, O Israel." Let me quote, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." Another very powerful statement, a statement to keep these people glued to the, glued to Yahweh, glued to the direction of Yahweh. And so I raised just those 3. Maybe we can have someone else come up with something else. And also, as we proceed, if there is something you hear that in the story, it struck you as very new, you can raise it also at this point.
Isaac, I have marked what you just repeated on page 76, "Hear, O Israel," in that prayer. I actually marked that so that if you look over on Scenic View, it talks about how many Jews recite this prayer day and night and have prayer practices for binding it to their forehead. Now, what I am going to challenge myself to do is learn this as a prayer, just like I would recite the Lord's Prayer or the 23rd Psalm. I'm really going to challenge myself to memorize that. So I really appreciate that. That stuck out to me. Another thing that stuck out to me was, we get back to page 71. In the middle of page 71, we have, "On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers apiece, when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil, and all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning." Last February, when I was in Israel with Anne and with Meg, one of the things that we were able to do was we were able to go to a Friday dinner at a home, and we were welcomed, and they had prepared everything on Friday. We had a huge meal on Friday night, but it was all in preparation for Saturday, because Saturday you didn't bake, you didn't boil, you didn't cook, you didn't have any interaction with anything except with your family. And so that really stuck out to me too. I think we have kind of let that Sabbath go. So I appreciated that. And I saw today where Walmart and Sam's will be closing on Thanksgiving. And, you know, to me, I'm so happy about that because maybe that will lead us back to things being closed on Sundays. So I hopefully in the midst of everything that we're going through now that is so negative, I found that as a positive today.
Good, yeah.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
The thing that kind of strikes to me is this continual story repeated over and over throughout the Bible and in our own lives and so forth. But God gives us freedom, but then there's deliverance, and that deliverance brings a relationship with God, and that the covenant that they had with the people perpetuates that relationship. And when we fall out of that, we lose that relationship with God. When Joseph brought his family in to Egypt, he said, "Hey, listen, you tell Pharaoh we're a bunch of herders," because they're like, "Ooh, we don't like people like that. We want just we'll put them in the land of Goshen and keep them by themselves. All right, so we'll contain them and we don't have to deal with them." But that was a good thing because they were able to keep their traditions and so on and so forth. And then when throughout, when they go into the promised land and so forth, it's saying stop, don't mingle with them, don't with your gods and so on and so forth, because we lose that relationship. So we have the law, and then a lot of times say, oh, we have grace now, we don't need the law. But yeah, we kind of still do, because if you need that covenant to perpetuate that relationship we have with God.
Thank you, Trent. Do we have someone else who is coming up with something before we shift gears?
I kind of feel, as I was reading through this and thinking back on it, I don't think it would have been easy to be an Israelite or one of God's chosen people. And there's probably something there that tells us it's never going to be easy. We have free will, we can turn away, there's always sin, there's things before us that turn us away, but we have to be faithful to support the covenant and be one of God's people. But to be an Israelite was extremely difficult. And, there was kind of a reason they were stiff-necked people. Who wants to eat manna for 40 years? This isn't easy. Wandering in the wilderness, nothing to see, nothing to do. I mean, that wasn't easy.
That's a good.
I mean, you've got this promised land that's coming, but when? When is it coming?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I hesitate to jump in since I haven't done the homework and stuff, but I guess if you go on past the Ten Commandments, the next thing it goes into is an area of the Old Testament that I find very difficult to accept. I tend to ignore the Old Testament except for Isaiah and the prophets that foretell the coming of the Messiah. But as you go on past the Ten Commandments, you get into the things like the law concerning slaves, the law concerning violence, the law concerning property, and all of the things like you're not supposed to sleep with an animal. If someone has sex with a virgin, then there's a whole complicated thing about what's to be done. There's this whole section of things which I don't think apply under the New Covenant and often seem quite bizarre, but this may be jumping ahead of where we're at.
Well, are you saying something, Sue?
No, I was.
Okay. Thank you, Bob, for that. And I think the world over, constitutions have always been contextual, either contextual or cultural. And so, yeah, there were very, very many difficult rules being passed and being promulgated by Moses at that time. But all these rules, if we could say in this constitution, were contextual, if we could say, were based on these particular people at this particular time, their culture, what they are as a people. Because you cannot take, for instance, you can take the American Constitution and take it to a country in Africa, and it will be very strange. I mean, it will be so alien, nobody will even be able to interpret it. Even maybe the sharpest legal minds will not be able to interpret this constitution, maybe to fit the common, the commoner in those countries. And so lawmaking and constitutions have always been contextual. And so maybe, I don't know whether as Christians today, we can purport to fit in the Mosaic constitution, or it would be strange or alien to us. Maybe that's something to ponder. But I wanted to highlight that constitutions are always contextual.
I see that, and that makes a lot of sense, but I'm still left with a question and this is probably just a problem of my own, of what do I learn from these old laws concerning my life as a Christian today? I'll know what to do if my ox gores somebody, or how to treat a Christian slave as opposed to a non-Christian one. But I don't think I'm going to be facing those things.
Bob, I was not raised Episcopalian. I was raised Baptist, Southern Baptist. So to me, the Old Testament is of huge importance from a learning standpoint when you start to learn from history. So I look at the Old Testament as a way of, well, let me say this. I compare the Old Testament and the New Testament to, yes, the Old Testament is that of laws, and where some of them absolutely, like Isaac said, contextual, yes. But then I look at the New Testament as the testament of love. So here we have the Old Testament before the birth and death of Jesus Christ, and then the New Testament is that of love. So I kind of look at it that way. I also kind of look at the Old Testament as there had to be proof to people that God was real and he meant business. So there had to be proof somewhere of the consequences. So that's kind of how I look at the Old Testament. So I don't let the Old Testament scare me, because we have a God of love, and he sent his son to save us, and he is a merciful God. And we have Jesus Christ as our Savior, his son, our Savior, who loves us no matter what. But we do have to remember that there are consequences. If that helps answer any of that.
And again,
I was brought up a Bible thumper, so my father, he read the Old Testament twice in a year and the New Testament 3 times in a year. So I've never done that, but it always bothered me as a child to hear the preachers that seem to enjoy most preaching on the Old Covenant and all the consequences and stuff like that. But thank you all for your insights.
I kind of think, too, though, you want to bind these people as a group. You may belong to a car club and you like hot rods or whatever. And if you didn't have that common thing, a lot of, the group would dissolve. Okay. So there was certain cultures and there were certain traditions, and whether you're, eating gefilte fish or whatever, it was something, it was food, you brought it to people together and so forth. And then, too, I kind of look at it as in the beginning, we're kind of learning, maybe a little bit of, you're going through the motions, you're kind of learning the law. It's kind of like as a kid, don't touch it because I said so. Okay. That's a reason. Okay. So we had certain things. Got a little bit older, realized, okay, I got to burn myself. Maybe that was a good reason why mom said stay away from the oven. So in the beginning, the oven wasn't bad. It wasn't whatever, but you had to learn a little bit of traditions, and you have to bind that group together, because God wants to have a relationship with us. He wants us to create a community of worshipers that who glory in the presence of the most glorious one. And so if we don't have that commonality, whether it's certain traditions and we do certain things and we don't do certain things, or we wear braids on our hair and we separate ourselves from the other people that are putting stuff on the high altars and so forth, and they needed to bind them as separate. This is who we are and so forth, and we're not going to be maybe tempted to go into other religions and so forth. So I think part of that was just kind of getting with the program. You wear the school uniform or whatever, and you get with their traditions, and it bound them together.
I don't want to get, since I'm a newcomer, I don't want to deviate too far from what the real scope of this lesson is. But I thought Kimmy brought up Miriam, the prophetess, and I thought that was so appropriate because today is the feast of Saint Mary Magdalene,
That's right.
who was also an apostle to the apostles. So it's quite an interesting coincidence.
That is very interesting. I didn't know that.
Thank you. And again, Jesus came and summarized all these laws in the Great Commandment. He said, love your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all you are. And the second, which is equally as important, love your neighbor. And if you look at the 10 Commandments, those two summarize the 10 Commandments, because it says relationship with God and relationship with fellow human beings. And again, lawmaking or constitution making is a process. It's not nothing which can be done overnight. So maybe that's why they had to stay in the wilderness for all those years for the completion of the Constitution. Maybe. Anyway, I want us to proceed because we have not yet looked at our questions for today. Because we are a little bit short on time, I think we are going to look at maybe 2 or 3 questions of all the questions. Maybe we could start, because some of them we have touched on them as we continued with the discussion. Maybe we could look at the question which says this: The journey of the people of God features amazing deliverance, but it also involves wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. When has your journey with God felt more like wandering? How has the experience of wandering impacted on your life? Maybe this is something which we could answer internally, but we are also free to answer, externally as a group. I think that the silence kind of tells me that, yes, we have listened to the question and we are thinking through ourselves where we have waited for a long time without maybe going the direction God would like us to go. Maybe we have preached to ourselves within ourselves, and we have seen, we have, figured the experiences. We have had the withering experiences we have had. And maybe because I've also had my withering experiences, how have they impacted on my faith? On one side, they have impacted my faith negatively. Because like the John who said, why go around this mountain for all those years? Till when? When you ask yourself such questions, at times it takes a toll on your faith. And I think that is when at times you start diverting and looking for alternatives to faith, looking for alternatives to what you believe in. And so the wandering for me has, one, impacted my faith negatively. And also on the flip side, the wandering has also impacted my faith positively, because out of all that wandering, out of all that, wandering, not knowing where you are and where you'll end up, it is out of that at some point, I've always realized I cannot make it on my own. I've beaten the bush for so long and I'm not going anywhere. So it is out of that maybe vulnerability that I keep realizing I cannot do it on my own. I have to rely on God. And so I said it both affects my faith negatively and also positively. That's me. Do we have someone who has something to mention on that before we go to the next question?
I can share a little bit. I'm older than all of you, but I had a St. Paul's conversion experience when I was, I guess, in my 30s, and since that time, the Lord has been, and I found him in the Episcopal Church, or he found me, and so since that time, when I've had crisis. During the time that my first husband became ill, that was a real crisis of faith. But through that all, I still knew that my Redeemer liveth. I remember being able to say the creeds and believing them, and knowing that no matter what I was going through, I knew that God was with me. So that's my little testimony.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Sue, for that. Those are the experiences which make a discussion live. We identify with what we are saying. I think we'll jump the other question and go to the next after that. I'm saying this for the interest of time, and I want us to touch at least across the board as many, as big areas as possible. When God rains down manna from heaven, the people are instructed to only take enough food for each day and nothing more. But they find it difficult to do. Why do you think God asks them to do that? Why do you think it's so difficult? Compare this to Matthew 16:9 to 13. What might these passages say to us today? Matthew 6:9 to 13 is the Lord's Prayer. I think he was trying to point to the line that says, give us this day our daily bread. I mean, this day, not tomorrow. And here are people being given food and told, instructed expressly by God, take only for today, don't keep for tomorrow. What are your thoughts?
They didn't trust that it would be there the next day. They wanted to make sure they weren't going to go hungry. And I think it's that trust, that it's faith.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have the faith. But it's not an easy thing. And that's why they were, we all have that free will again, where we don't have to do everything we're told.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't like to do what we're told.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time, that's probably true.
Yeah.
I think the key thing here is discipline. I think it's all about discipline, which also leads to exactly what Joanne says, is about having that faith. But if we are disciplined in the Lord's commandments and disciplined in what his instructions are, we know without a doubt that he is going to provide for us no matter what. But we do have free will, and free will can also lead to greed. We may not see it as greed. Sometimes we want to think greed. We want to disguise it as preparation, maybe. But that's not necessarily it. We are getting greedy, and we are, in that respect, we're also challenging him as far as, okay, Lord, I mean, I know you told us this, but just in case. So we trick ourselves into thinking that we're actually preparing for something rather than just being disciplined and having faith in him.
Jimmy's right. We all can remember this, what happened to the goose that laid the golden eggs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
It says, the Bible, ask and, basically you shall receive. But, we have to ask, you say, well, God knows everything we need before we ever ask God. I don't need to ask him. He's going to take care of me. But sometimes you do have to, have that relationship with God. You have to have that relationship if you expect to be able to receive God's blessing. And so, get it on your knees and keeping that communication open. You have to do it. You have to do it.
What does this speak to us in our contexts today? I mean, when we hear this passage, how do we read it today? How does it speak to us today? Maybe as a business person, maybe as someone who is thinking about the future. I mean, trying to think about what tomorrow will bring. Maybe someone as maybe a younger person like me, in terms of thinking of investing for tomorrow. What does this passage talk to us?
Well, we're right in the midst of a pandemic. And when you remember back in late February, early March to mid-March, oh my gosh, remember when it came on the news that there was going to be a shortage of toilet paper? Oh, what did we do? We ran out and we cleared the shelves for all the way from toilet paper to canned goods. There was a panic. And did we actually, looking back, did we actually go straight to panic mode, or did we hit our knees? I can say, hey, I went to panic mode. I didn't hit my knees right off the bat. And so I think that's what we're faced with exactly today, right here. We are living this right now. We have to know that God is going to deliver us from this pandemic.
Mhm.
And we have to have faith in that. And no matter what we're faced with and what we think might be a shortage right now, we have to come together, provide for each other, provide prayer, but we have to keep the faith that God is going to get us through this.
Mm-hmm.
Consider the lilies of the field, they toil not, neither do they spin.
Well, it's not easy. It's not easy to read this passage today and, put it fully. I mean, like as human beings, naturally we think of survival. We think of, will I survive till tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
And you see, God telling these people, take only for today. They're in the wilderness. What would you expect maybe of people who are stronger? Maybe the strong ones could take all the manna. If there was no that instruction, they could take all the manna and put it in a go down somewhere. And then on a Saturday or a Friday when the manna is not coming, maybe they would be selling the manna at a high price. There could be, that was a business opportunity, but I think this is a matter of trusting in God, having faith that He holds me today, He'll hold me tomorrow. Maybe we could read that also in relation to the passage where Jesus tells the people that, why worry so much about what you will eat tomorrow? Why kill yourself with depression, with anxiety, thinking of what will tomorrow bring? I think God was like, in the matrix of God, He was like, anxiety is not godly. You just relax, have faith that things will move. To a point, Jesus telling them, even the birds of the air eat and they have no stores. They have no granaries. They eat and they go and start rejoicing. Maybe that is not a very friendly passage, maybe for investment-minded people, maybe. I would suggest that we do one more question and then we call it a day. Moses reads the people for 40 years, sticking with them even when they grumble, complain, and sin. Yet, he doesn't get to see the people make it all the way into the promised land. What do you think about that? What might that say to us about our own service to God? That is not very easy, but it's our own application. You have to apply it.
Thank God we're living under the new covenant, not the old.
Yeah. I've always felt that was so sad that Moses, he was so obedient that God.
He didn't even get there.
What?
And he didn't even get to see the promised land.
Yeah.
Geez, 40 years, Dad, listening to those people complain day after day after day. But that was also, they had, day after day after day, they had 40 years to repeat the trust that they needed in God to build that covenant, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, God said that none of that generation was going to see it. It was 40 years basically in the Bible is a generation. And so it was, your generation's not going to see it. It's going to be your children's, the next generation that's going to see this.
But I just think how obedient Moses and, Miriam was probably already dead. Anyway, I always thought that's one of my questions I'm going to ask God. because he was so faithful to listen and to put up with the crazy Israelites. So,
Well, I also think it says in the Bible where God kind of rebuked them because they were whining about everything, and he says, "Hey, I brought you the water. I gave you the water. No, it wasn't you. It wasn't you. It was God."
yeah.
That was kind of his downfall.
Mm-hmm. Right.
As we serve God today, do we at times feel, do we at times put ourselves in the situation of Moses? Do we at times feel like, am I doing it the right way? Am I doing it in a way where surely I'll get the crown, I'll get the prize? Food for thought. Because as much as it was painful for Moses, well, we are not Moses, but we feel the pain of him not getting into that promised land, even after a lot of going through a lot of trouble to have these people to the promised land. What does that speak to me in terms of my my ministry, in terms of my serving God?
Yeah.
Well, mm-hmm.
Maybe as old as he was tired and didn't care because he knew God. He'd had lots of conversations with him. So maybe he didn't, maybe he wasn't reacting to it. Maybe he was just as glad he didn't have to mess with taking them into the Holy Land.
We look now, knowing the New Testament, that there's life everlasting, but they didn't even have that. I mean, when you died, that's it. Boom, over, the end.
Mm-hmm.
Not even getting to see the promised land, and then there's nothing after that. I mean, they didn't believe in life after death at all.
Yeah. Right.
Well, can we think through these in relation to the parable of that gentleman who called some people to his farm? Some came early in the morning, others came around 9, others came around 11, others came around mid-afternoon, and others even just got into the farm and the time was up. And when the salary came, everybody was equalized. I mean, what does that tell us of God's grace? Does it tell us that it is not us who dictate or who determine the grace of God on us, but on the other hand, it's a free will, it's God's free will to extend his grace to whomever he chooses. I mean, ours is just to be, that's what maybe I would think of it. Ours, I think, is just to be at the right place at the right time. I mean, and to be closely connected with him. To have a close relationship with him without complaining. Because after all, this grace does not belong to us. The grace belongs to him. And he gives freely to whomever he chooses. God's providence. It's called theodicy. I mean, God's providence, stretches to whomever he chooses. He can overpass me and extend his favor and his blessing to someone, my neighbor, whom I feel in my own worldly way of looking at things, whom I feel should be in hell. I mean, that's our God. Maybe if Moses was there, like Sue said, he could answer us in terms of what he feels about that. Do you suggest we stop at that point? It's 40 minutes after 6.
Sure. I wanted to share one thing I just sort of discovered, recently. You can see it on YouTube or whatever, and just search the where is Mount Sinai?
Oh,
Kind of a new theory
Mhm.
on that it's in
Mhm.
present-day Saudi Arabia.
hmm
And there they found what looks like maybe a big open grave where maybe the idol worshippers of the calf were all put
hmm
in the Red Sea, where they think actually they crossed. There's coral growth that looks like shape of chariot wheels. There's the rock where that was split, and then it's pretty interesting that in the past I thought that maybe just all in theory. Maybe not so much. Maybe not so much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Trent. Good. I think before we wind up, because we're going to wind up at that point, we need 5 volunteers for next week. We will send them the assignment maybe before the end of the week. Just volunteer. We'll make sure you get the assignment. And it's as easy as we did, and we always do.
I will not be here next Wednesday. If
Right.
I am here, I may be a little bit late, but don't count on me for an assignment.
Thank you, Kimmy.
That only leaves 4 people then.
I didn't know there was going to be a test.
No.
I'll try and be prepared next week. I'll have to get the book, and I really should get prepared. So
Yeah.
I'll see what I can do.
It's
You know
good to
what
have you, Bob. It's good to
Thank
have
you,
you with
Bob.
the group, Bob.
Yeah.
I believe we have a few copies of the book. Is that so, Trent?
I believe so at the church. I'm pretty sure that they are some.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4.
I'm sorry, what, Joanne?
I think there's at least 3 or 4 on the,
Perfect.
as you come in right there where Regina sits.
Okay, so Bob, you have a copy there.
Looks like that. Brown the path.
Okay.
Good. So that's Bob. Who else?
I'll do something. I don't. Yeah.
Thank you, Sue.
I'll be glad to do whatever you need me to do.
Thank you, Trent.
I'll do something if you need it, or Glenn will, one of us.
Thank you, the Grants.
I'll give it a try. Something simple.
Okay, we have one more.
Maybe, well, we don't have another person to volunteer, but maybe we
Oh
can
yeah, sure.
link for somebody we can talk to.
Okay.
Who might be back by vacation.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe by Sunday we have figured out the 5th person.
Mhm.
Right. Thank you so much for all of you being here, and you always make these very, very lively. I always enjoy the interactions. I mean,
Mhm.
they develop me as much as I also believe they develop you.
Yes.
Would
Absolutely.
someone, okay, sorry, Sue.
No, I was just saying yes.
Right. Thank you. Would someone volunteer to say a prayer for us, even as we continue to pray for our brother Dave?
I will.
Right.
Most gracious and kind Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight with thankful hearts that we can depend on you no matter what. I personally thank you for each of our classmates, Lord, that we are dependent on each other to gain insight and from ourselves and from yourself, Lord. Thank you so much for your word that you have brought to us tonight. Lord, please be with Dave, Saul, and with Meg, and with everyone else in our congregation and throughout Lord, our neighborhood, extending to everyone. Everyone is our neighbor, Lord, and we know that. And we just ask that you be with anyone in need right now. Please be with us as we go through the night and the rest of the week. Keep us cusped in your hand, Lord, and provide us safety and protection. And Lord, we are so thankful and we are so blessed to have you in our lives. We pray this in your holy and gracious name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, all. Have a great
Bye, everyone.
evening and good night.
So,